Every town has a place no one dares mention. In Meadowbrook, that place is the Hollow Creek subdivision. Since 1998, every patrol car entering stops at the first street. Radios fail, officers rotate, and no official explanation has survived more than 48 hours in the records. The last SWAT attempt resulted in screams from inside cars still locked inside. Today, we'll show you why. When Sergeant Miller saw what was walking between the unlit streetlights on the first street, he didn't have time to shoot or to run away, and what came next was impossible to explain. Before we cross the first street, I need to tell you something important. If you're here, it's because you're not looking for ordinary stories. You seek the places where logic fails, where screams don't reach the surface. Here in Conflict Route, with each episode you dive deeper. And if you want to continue descending with us, subscribe to the channel now. Leave a like now, not out of vanity, but because it shows you're ready to face what comes next. Take a deep breath, because after that, you might not come back the same. Meadowbrook was a small town in rural Indiana, known for its cornfields and quiet. But there was one name no one said out loud: Hollow Creek. Located on the edge of the city, the subdivision had been a failed attempt at urban expansion in the 1990s. 20 streets were paved, streetlights erected, and houses partially built. But suddenly, the construction company went bankrupt, and the land was abandoned. The strange thing is that the first patrols that passed through the area began reporting interference. Nothing serious at first, radios failing, a feeling of disorientation. But over time, the cases became more serious. In 2001, a state police cruiser went missing for 6 hours. When it was found, the 2 officers were locked inside, unconscious, their eyes completely dilated, as if they had seen something their minds couldn't process. They never spoke. Again, it was then that the subdivision received a nickname whispered among local police officers: the blind spot. Fast forward to 2024. After the disappearance of 2 teenagers who invaded Hollow Creek during an exploration live stream, the FBI decided to intervene alongside a special operations team from Indianapolis SWAT. The command was under the responsibility of the veteran Sergeant Michael Miller, 41 years old, 18 years on the force, specialized in urban operations and known for never backing down from a call. He had previously led operations in war zones, but he showed some discomfort with this mission. Perhaps it was because no drone camera sent to Hollow Creek returned with images. The feed would cut out after passing the first street. At the command center set up 3 blocks from the subdivision, the agents geared up. Their tactics were clear. Enter in a convoy with 3 vehicles, complete coverage, cameras on their uniforms, and 3-way communication via radio, satellite and local frequencies. Before departure, Miller asked the FBI agent who requested the mission, "Why didn't anyone pass the first street before?" The agent responded curtly, "Because something does not allow." Miller's cruiser was the first to pass through the entrance arch, an old, corroded sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek. Your future starts here." The tires screeched on the cracked asphalt. Vegetation invaded the street. The streetlights were leaning and the wind seemed to have a different tone. It was then that the car radio crackled with a high-pitched interference and a male voice sounded briefly, "Go back. He doesn't like to be seen." The 3 agents inside the car looked at each other. There was no voice identification, no record of an entry on the channel. Miller grabbed the microphone. "Unit Charlie 1 entering the first street. Any outside communication?" Silence. Then, all 3 of them realized at the same time. The streetlights began to go out, one by one, as if someone was walking through them, backwards. "Guys, there's something moving between the posts." The officer in the back seat raised his gun, pointing it at nothing. And then, the radio erupted with a loud, almost animal-like breathing sound. Miller got out of the car cautiously. The asphalt beneath his feet seemed to tremble slightly. Across the street, something appeared for 2 seconds. Tall, hunched, dark, and fast. "What the f..." Was that? The newbie muttered, but no one answered. What followed was a sudden metallic crack. The tires on the front vehicle began to deflate on their own. "Retreat!" Miller shouted, but at that moment, the street behind them no longer existed, not in a metaphorical sense. Literally, the street had disappeared, as if it had never existed, and the radio now broadcast on repeat. He doesn't like to be seen. He doesn't like to be seen. He doesn't like... Miller looked around, but something inside him told him that looking back would be a mistake. And then the backseat agent started laughing, loud, uncontrollable, the laugh of someone who has lost everything. And that's when he whispered, in a tone completely different from his own voice, "Now you're from Hollow Creek too." Agent Gavin's laughter cut through the silence like a razor. He trembled, his eyes fixed on something that wasn't in front of him, or at least not to the others. Miller tried to pull him by the collar, but Gavin resisted, as if something were holding him back from the inside out. "Gavin, focus on me! Gavin!" But the agent only repeated one phrase. "The street closes when it chooses. You're not in charge here. You never have been." The camera sensors on Miller's chest began to flicker. The video feed pulsed between static and fragmented images, bent utility poles, house structures that seemed too crooked for physics, shadows moving against the direction of the wind. Outside, the second SWAT vehicle approached for rescue. 2 officers disembarked and trained their weapons on the perimeter. That's when one of the lanterns flickered. The light pointed to a door to the left. One of those unfinished houses, but there was something on the door frame, something that shouldn't be there. It was like a handprint, but with 6 fingers burned into the still fresh cement. The radio sound worsened. Disjointed words emerged, as if someone were trying to form sentences within a whirlpool. "He hears through the plants. Only breathe when it stops. Don't follow the faces. They are just empty molds." Miller returned to the patrol car, trying to reconnect with the command center. "Command, this is Charlie 1. The street has changed. The topography doesn't match the map. We've lost access to the road. Requesting air evacuation or heavy artillery reinforcement?" Nothing. The answer did not come from the radio. It came from Gavin's own voice, still standing outside, eyes fixed on the house with the mark. "Evacuation only works if you never entered, but you have already crossed." Suddenly the vehicle in front burst into silent flames. No noise, just a flash, as if the sound had been cancelled. The 2 agents inside vanished on impact, or what should have been an impact. The fire looked cold, blue. It flowed around the structure like a flaming ooze. "Retreat! Everyone, retreat now!" Miller shouted. They ran back down the street, but the more they ran, the less progress they made. It was like a nightmare hotel corridor. The first street, it never ended. "That's not possible," Agent Lee muttered, standing next to Miller. "This street is only 200 meters long." But they had already been running for more than 5 minutes. Gavin didn't follow them. He stood there smiling, his arms open as if expecting to be embraced by some invisible entity. And then the sound came. It wasn't a scream, it was a cry, but multiple. Children, women, men, as if someone had superimposed hundreds of voices into the same throat. The sound came from the drains, from the broken pipes, from the rotten tree trunks, and they all said the same thing in a serious tone. "Still 3 to go." Miller stopped running. His breathing was heavy and his heartbeat rang in his ears. The ground now felt gelatinous. He looked at Lee and noticed that his colleague had blood in his ears, thick, dark, almost black. "Lee!" But Lee pointed upward, his finger trembling. Miller followed his gaze, and he saw. One of the street lamps had a mouth, giant among the wiring, concrete teeth, tongue of wires, and from it oozed something like blood mixed with black ink. The mouth spoke. Yes, the pole spoke. "He's waking up," Lee screamed. A desperate scream, not of physical pain, but of full understanding that logic had broken down. Miller pulled Lee by the arm, but it was too late. Lee's body began to unravel like wet paper. First his fingers, then his shoulders, until all that was left was an empty uniform and a badge lying on the sticky asphalt. The sergeant stepped back, trembling. "This isn't a place, this is an organism," he said to himself, and then the ground beneath his feet shook, not like an earthquake, but how a breath. Hollow Creek was waking up, and he didn't just want to scare, he wanted to remember. Miller looked around. The unfinished houses now had windows with eyes, literally, giant human eyes that blinked slowly as if observing not the present, but the memory share, and the sky was beginning to bleed. Miller was alone. In practice, there were still agents left in the operation. But in practice, it no longer meant anything within Hollow Creek. He clutched the radio tightly, even though he knew it was only noise. The silence around him was dense, almost physical, and the sky, which should have been clear, held a hue that didn't exist in any known spectrum. Not blue, not purple, not grey. It was a color that seemed to be the reverse of consciousness. Behind him, the street he'd walked, closed in as if slowly swallowed by an invisible wave. The structures of the houses reconfigured themselves. Roofs turned upside down. Some doors levitated. A window floated 2 feet off the ground, rotating on its own. He then heard footsteps, but they were the yaw. His own footsteps coming behind him, echoing the sound he had made running minutes before, as if the subdivision were reproducing his escape. It was at that moment that Gavin's voice returned, but not over the radio. It came from the wall of an unfinished house, which suddenly began to move, forming a face. It was as if the concrete had flesh, muscle, and the mouth opened only to mock. "He remembers you, Miller, from before, long before." Before? Before what? Before you were born, before maps, before electric light, before we called it the world. The ground shook once more, and this time, Miller fell. Literally. The street collapsed beneath his feet, revealing an underground tunnel. He fell about 10 feet into an open shaft, but what lay below made no sense. It was as if he had fallen into a basement of a house that never existed. Narrow tunnels, walls covered in old photographs, some with burnt edges. In all of them, familiar faces, politicians, journalists, law enforcement officers, but the dates were wrong. One showed Miller's own face, dated 1946. He approached, hands shaking. The image was in sepia, and he wore a period police uniform, a peaked hat, a leather holster. At the bottom of the photo, in tiny letters, he also promised to return, and he failed. Miller screamed. He ripped the photo from the wall and tried to climb back to the surface, but the hole had disappeared. Taken. In the tunnels, the sound changed. Now there was faint music, a vinyl hiss, playing something that sounded like a cradle turning. "Do you remember now, Sergeant?" The voice came from all sides. "You led the first mission. In 1952, you erased everything. You thought burying it would be the end, but he doesn't. Forget. He never forgets." Miller advanced through the tunnels, gun drawn, though something in his gut told him that gun was as useful here as a flashlight against a hurricane. He arrived at a round room built of irregular bricks. In the center sat a dentist's chair, but it was old, rusty, and covered in fingernail marks on the sides. In front of the chair, a tube television, connected, on the screen, a live broadcast. It was him, inside the patrol car, standing at the entrance to Hollow Creek. His eyes blank, unblinking. He was seeing himself from the outside. That's impossible. The image on the TV began to burn inside. The Miller on the screen slowly turned around and looked straight into the camera, not for whoever was recording, for him, for the Miller who watched, and then he said, "You still have time, but not to save, just to remember." The screen shattered, shards flew and hit his face. He fell backward. He felt something trickle from his forehead, blood, but when he wiped it away, the blood was black. Looking at his palms, Miller saw that the skin was beginning to peel away in grey fragments, as if it were turning to dust, to ruin, to memory. He ran, wherever it went. The hallways now curved like intestines. There were no more right angles. Lights came from inside the walls. The vinyl sound grew faster, more distorted. The melody now resembled voices shouting from behind a locked door. And then he arrived, to a wooden door. Simple, like any suburban home. There was a number nailed to it. 13, the same house where, according to the 2001 SWAT report, the first two agents disappeared. He took a deep breath and touched the doorknob. Free. But something was breathing behind her. Something sick. And before he could open it, Gavin's voice, or what was left of him, whispered in his ear like a cold wind. What's buried here isn't dead, just waiting for you to remember his name. Miller opened the door, and what he saw on the other side was not of this world. The door creaked open, and what lay beyond it did not follow the rules of physics. It was an ordinary room, at least at first. Worn brown carpet, a moss-green velvet sofa, a bookshelf lined with old spine books. But there was something off in the air. The room breathed. The sound was subtle but present, as if the house were alive, inhaling the fear of anyone who dared enter. Miller stepped cautiously. The wood of the floor groaned, but not under her weight. She cried. In truth, as if each step pressed against memories, and they responded with pain. On the wall were portraits, not of people, but of vehicles, some charred, others abandoned. Below, small plaques with dates, 2001, 2007, 2013. He recognized one of the images. It was Lee's patrol car. The carpet was damp. When Miller crouched down, he saw it was blood, fresh, warm, and sweet-smelling. But most disturbing of all, when he touched the liquid, sounds came from it. Radio sounds, SWAT voices, communication clips from past. Missions. Charlie 2, visual negative. Ghost unit on the perimeter. Miller? Miller, where are you? He stood up with a sinking feeling in his stomach. It was as if the blood of the house held the voices of those who never left. On the left, a half-open basement door. And there came the sound of a tube television. Again, same pattern, same static, but this time, someone was waiting for him. Sitting on the living room sofa was a man in a dark suit, his back straight, his hands folded in, his lap, but his face was covered with a cloth mask, sewn with wire into a forced smile. "Who are you?" Miller shouted, pointing his gun. The figure did not respond. She just slowly turned her head toward him, and something about the gesture triggered a memory in Miller. Something old, something he shouldn't remember. The figure pointed to the basement without saying a word. The sergeant took a step back. What's there? The answer came not from the figure, but from the house itself. The walls began to pulse. The portraits trembled. Words appeared on the windows, written in steam. "You promised to bury. You failed. I don't understand," Miller shouted, the gun now useless, trembling in his hand. "What did I promise? What are you talking about?" But deep down, a part of him knew. He descended the basement stairs step by step, the air growing thicker. It smelled of scrap metal, mold, and formaldehyde. At the end of the stairs there was a mirror, but the reflection wasn't his. It was a man in a 1952 police uniform. Himself, but younger, and in his arms he carried a body wrapped in canvas. The reflection looked straight at him, and then whispered, "You swore no one would see this place again, but you brought people back." The reflection opened the canvas. Inside, there was no corpse. There was a face made of shadows and stitched flesh. No eyes, just deep holes where there should have been light. And the face smiled. Miller stumbled back, hitting his back against a wall that hadn't been there before. Now he was inside a concrete cell, small, no doors, no windows, just him and a voice. Every time someone comes in, he wakes up a little more. "You should know. You're the one who locked him in here." "I don't remember that," he shouted, punching the walls. The voice laughed. "Because he wants you to forget. Because fear is sweeter when it comes as a surprise." The cell then began to shrink, literally, as if it were alive, contracted in hatred and revenge. Miller shouted. He closed his eyes and woke up. "I was in the back seat of the police car. It was night again. The entrance to Hollow Creek was ahead. The radio was on, but staticky. The other agents were in the car, alive, normal, as if nothing had happened. "Miller?" Gavin asked, "Is everything okay? You blacked out for a few seconds there." The sergeant looked around, sweating. "What? We're now entering the first street. Ready your weapon. The mission is beginning." Miller glanced in the rearview mirror. His eyes were black, pupils dilated until they filled everything, and behind him, sitting in the middle seat, was another version of himself, dirty, torn, shivering. But before I could scream, the familiar voice came over the radio, repeating like a lament. "He doesn't like to be seen. He doesn't like you remembering him." Miller no longer knew what was a dream, memory, or reality. He was back in the car, but time was lost. The radio oscillated between static and phrases spoken by voices he recognized, but who had been dead for years. "The house is watching. There's someone in the back seat. The shadows know your name." Agent Gavin, now seemingly normal, drove with a fixed gaze, but there was something wrong with him. His left hand was shaking, not from fear, but as if he were trying to fight himself. "Gavin, do you remember going into Hollow Creek before?" Miller asked, his voice hoarse. Gavin didn't respond immediately. "No, but sometimes I dream about this. Plus, about this same street, only I'm outside, and there's no one else inside. Like this, I watch everything from outside, and everyone who comes in stays." The sentence fell like a weight of concrete on Miller's chest. He looked out the window. The houses were still there, but they were different. Some were more complete than before. Others now had lights in the windows. One of them, number 13, had a sign that blinked with red haze. "Here he sleeps." It was then that he noticed something even more terrifying. There was no way out. The police car circled the first street, but it never led to the next. They always came back to the same point. "Get in the car now!" Miller shouted. Gavin slammed on the brakes. Miller got out and ran to the end of the street, where it should have junctioned with 2nd Avenue. But when he turned the corner, I was back at the entry point. Gavin came down after him, out of breath. "We're spinning! Stuck!" "No," Miller said, swallowing hard. "This isn't a real place." "So what is it?" Miller pointed to the ground. Ancient cracks were beginning to open, and from them rose a dark smoke that seemed to be trying to form words, but failed. The asphalt was now shaking in pulses, and then they heard the screams, various, mixed, agents, civilians, children, all echoing from different houses at once, as if Hollow Creek were a lung full of suffocated memories. The sergeant then did something desperate. He took his gun and shot at one of the houses. The impact was dry. The wall bled. Yes, it bled, not cement, meat. The house roared. From within the structure emerged a humanoid, but deformed, figure with cracked grey skin, a sewn-up mouth and eyes replaced by rusty nails. She walked as if she had memories inside her. Each step released old police radio sounds, and she repeated Miller's lines. "Secure area, nothing to report. Patrol complete. Turning off the radio for now." "Is that me?" he whispered, terrified. "It's what you left here," Gavin said, his voice weaker now. The figure then pointed to House 13 and made a slow gesture as if to say, "You must remember, Miller male." Gavin stood back, staring at the grey figure, as if hypnotized. The sergeant went through the door of House 13, and this time there was no living room. There was an endless corridor, full of numbered doors, and a sweet, feminine voice whispered, "Choose one, but know this. Each one leads to a piece of what you erased." He walked. Port 8 started to shake. The 12 cried. The 3 was bleeding, but it was the first one that opened on its own. Inside, an old recording was playing on a tape deck. Next to it, a folder bearing the Indiana State Police seal, 1952. He took it. It opened. Inside, a photo. It was him. In his old uniform, he stood next to 6 other agents. Behind them, the same subdivision but newly built, and a red stamp in the bottom corner. Containment Operation, Case Hollow Creek. In the background, the voice on the tape player said, "We have begun the sealing. The object remains at rest. The sacrifices have been made. Reality has been adjusted. Hollow Creek will not be remembered." Miller fell to his knees. The memories came back like a flood. He wasn't just a modern agent. He was an anchor, reincarnated, repositioned, a piece that had been brought back by Hollow Creek itself, part of him. He participated in the original containment, and he had promised never to let the cycle start again. But it failed. Because he came back, walls began to close in, doors locked. Gavin's screams echoed through the house, but now distorted, as if he were being torn apart from the inside out. And then, the house whispered something that made Miller freeze. The next patrol is already on its way, and they have forgotten who they are too. Miller was on his knees. The folder bearing the Indiana State Police seal burned slowly in his hands, but the fire didn't harm him. It was a fire of oblivion, one that extinguished the last shreds of resistance that still kept him standing. Slowly, he understood. Hollow Creek wasn't a place. It was a prison built to contain something that should never have been excavated. And the men who sealed this entity, almost a century ago, sacrificed themselves to keep the world sane. Men like him. But over time, the world forgot. And by forgetting, he weakened the seal. He had returned to the wrong place with the wrong tools, bringing new bodies, new voices, new consciousnesses to nourish that which can only grow when someone enters with doubts. House number 13 dissolved into dense fog, and the corridors turned into curved tunnels, spiraling to a point where space collapsed. Miller fell, or maybe it was pulled, and then I was in an open field, surrounded by hundreds of uniformed police officers, all motionless, with their backs turned. They were arranged in perfect rows as if marching to nowhere. In the center, a gigantic, curved figure made of black matter stitched together with human hands, writhed, faceless, without a precise shape. It was like a body molded from fears, the original object, the buried thing, the heart of Hollow Creek. And then the police turned around, each with Miller's own face. Young, old, wounded, in uniform from the 50s, 70s, 2000s, as if every version of himself had come back here, in every era, and failed. "You shouldn't have come back," they said in unison. "You were the lock. Now you are the key." The creature in the center began to rise, not in a hurry, but gently, like someone waking up from a long dream, hungry. Around him, the field began to close in, and Miller felt gravity pull at his mind, not his body, his mind, as if something were trying to rip away his thoughts, his memories, his certainties. And he saw, with the clarity of a lucid nightmare, the next patrols were already arriving. Scenes flashed before his eyes. New vehicles parking at the entrance to Hollow Creek. Young agents with no idea what awaited them. Drones falling from the sky. Radio transmissions that repeated endlessly. Charlie 1, entry cleared. Quiet First Street, nothing to report. Nothing yet, Miller shouted, trying to warn, but he had no voice left. His body was now made of the same material as the others. Seams, smoke, condensed memory. He was part of the organism, a new face within the flesh of Hollow Creek. The last image before the end was this. A new patrol car got out. 3 officers, 2 men, 1 woman. They look around, weapons ready. One of them, nervous, speaks to the radio. "This is Charlie 1, First Street, Hollow Creek subdivision. All quiet for now." Silence, and then a voice comes over the channel, weak, hoarse, familiar. "Go back. He doesn't like to be seen." It was Miller's voice, or rather, what was left of it. The screen goes dark. The street remains, and Hollow Creek breathes, waiting for the next vehicle. If you've made it this far, it's because you've braved crossing streets that no one else dares to tread. But now I want to know, at what point did Hollow Creek really give you goosebumps? Comment below, tell me what you think really was buried there. Maybe Someone will see your theory before the next patrol comes in, and if this story caught your attention, if it made you look twice at your own street, leave your like, because it shows that you survived. Subscribe to Conflict Route, because there is a lot coming, and some of them are closer than you think.